So we have a few minutes for some discussion, and I'd like to open up the floor to questions or comments for our panelists. Of course, I have a few that I'd like to throw at them myself. And I think the one that I've heard recently is for the ICHOM initiative, Stephen, is that Netherlands has put forward an initiative where they want 50% of their patients, people who receive care in the Netherlands, to have ICHOM reported outcomes in the next 5 years. So it's a pretty huge target, a pretty big endorsement. Are you seeing other countries kind of, or jurisdictions step up like that, or is Netherlands just those crazy Dutch?
Right, so the Netherlands are definitely above and beyond on this. And we had a conference last week in DC with about 600 people at it. About 150 were from the Netherlands, right? So they're all in on this, and they put a lot of effort into this to move it forward. There are some health systems in the U.S., for instance, and there are some pockets in the U.K. where they're very, very focused on implementing patient-reported outcomes across multiple disease sets, multiple disease sites. But those are a lot more isolated. And I think in New South Wales, Australia, they're looking a lot more into this as well. But the Netherlands is by far and away one of those cases where they've really kind of gone all in on this, and they're hoping to lead, not a revolution, but a change in the way that things are being looked at in Europe, to have many more countries that have single-payer systems, use this as a way to look at value.
It's kind of stark to put that against the fact that the Dutch came within 2 months of implementing something and pulled the plug, as Aine had pointed out. So even though it seems really bright to do the outcomes, it seems really not bright to not put the machinery in place to track it. So, this is quite a contrast that you can have bright people, doing different things in the same country. It seems like a shame. Do you think they'll do it? Do you think they'll be successful?
Certainly, I think it's difficult because individual hospitals or individual healthcare systems may decide that they want to pull back from these things. That's why engagement with places like the OECD and the World Economic Forum, which is something, groups that we've been reached out to by and have worked with, I think a larger level of engagement with them as well, and an endorsement from those organizations. It helps. We have to have multiple partners in this.
Well, I just see the value from the point of view of it sounds like a metric system for outcomes. Like, I'm a physicist, so I think having standard measures of units of measure is very helpful. But what I thought was really interesting was when Alexis was presenting, is that those standard measures let fluid investment like finance actually run across that paradigm. In other words, you could have multiple people agreeing on the outcomes and the same measure. And so it really enables things like this social impact bond concept to come to life, because multiple jurisdictions around the world are agreeing on how they're going to measure outcomes. So if I'm in Ontario developing a technology that I can demonstrate improves outcomes, my market is not the local person who decided how to measure outcomes. My market is the whole world measuring outcomes the same way. So I think this is really powerful. So Alexis, maybe you could talk about how the portability and the draw for investment on the social impact bond is impacted by things like this.
I'll just mention one thing also that we're seeing, and so the global nature of the ICHOM outcomes, or just having any kind of common measure system, is also relevant for businesses in the healthcare sector. So increasingly you're hearing even quite small healthcare organizations say, I can help you hit your ICHOM measures, I can contribute to this ICHOM measure. And so it's becoming kind of one of these sort of stamps, right? Like, this is something we all know what we're talking about. As an organization, I'm in touch with what you're trying to achieve, and so I can connect the dots for you. And so I think that's also positive, and we're seeing it with the ventures. From a social impact bond perspective, the outcomes and the idea of having some common measures is critical. We can do these deals in one-offs, and that's where we're at right now. We're doing one-off deals with an individual outcome payer, and some investors, an individual service provider, and that is fine, and that's where we're meant to be right now. And to your point, it takes a lot longer. You sort of go, this is a good idea, and then you get into it, and you're like, wow, this is a lot of work. This is taking way more time than we anticipated. And so that, at the moment, is a big criticism of the model, because the transaction costs to get a deal like this off the ground are actually significant, because it's new to all of us. We're not used to working in this way. But the evolution of the concept is that you could start to have common prices for particular outcomes. So this is sort of a concept associated with rate cards, and you see it in other places. I don't know of a case of seeing it really in healthcare, but If we look at unemployment, for example, there are countries that say if you can place an individual in long-term employment for over 6 months, that individual is at this risk level, we will pay X. And so they've created a market for services specific to this population, and they have a price. So as a service provider, you know, okay, I have a price frame I'm working within. If I can deliver those outcomes, then I should go into this market, and you create a real market force for increased service provision at sort of the national or provincial stage. So it's sort of the evolution of how we could see this model moving if we're able to provide prices matched to specific outcomes.
Yeah, that fluidity comes alive because of the standardization, which is really powerful. And then the portability of the invention can go wide. I know if you go to the ICHOM website, they have a whole bunch of software provision that they point to different groups that can help you measure outcomes. And so the technology around doing this and aggregating that is going to be, I think, really, really interesting. And so I find the linkage really powerful. We're just going to have to be pretty quick here so we can get a break. If there's any questions, please feel free to throw up your hand. One of our microphone-bearing individuals will bring it on. There's one right there. Perfect.
Alexa, can you talk a little bit about the unintended consequences of pay for performance in, sort of signing people up to get outcomes and only getting money if you get those people to have those outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to, so I should, and I didn't say this, so thank you. This model will not work for every kind of service, of every kind of project or intervention. And there are certainly going to be worthwhile projects to fund for which the outcomes are very difficult to measure and maybe are not appropriate to measure in a numeric way. And that there will always be projects like that. But there are also going to be a handful of projects where actually having an upfront conversation about the outcome you're trying to achieve, measuring it along the way, seeing whether you achieved it, and actually then deciding whether to kind of pay or maybe to continue future payments dependent on the success of that intervention, that will be a good fit. What we don't want to see, though, is that you are cherry-picking patients, that you're making kinds of adjustments in the way that you design your service so that you're only hitting those targets. And so that's incumbent on the designers of these financial arrangements to think ahead to where there might be perverse incentives and build in the appropriate safeguards, and also to have much broader set of performance management metrics. So while payment may be linked to a small subset of measures, 1, 2, 3, you're actually looking at a whole host of measures along the way so that you can see where there may be things that you hadn't anticipated. Now, I also want to point out that in these particular deals, they came really from a nonprofit kind of world. And all the stakeholders around the table are very motivated by helping the populations that they're working for, very motivated to actually see improvements and see change. So I think, in my experience, all of these deals have some kind of mechanism to say, this just isn't working, stop. We're partway through the deal. There are get out of jail cards here. You're not, if this isn't working and we're doing something that's unintentionally negative for the population that we're aiming to help, then we stop doing this, right? So, nothing should be so structured that you can't change course along the way.
Okay, so we're going to run out of time because we're supposed to have a coffee break and we're running a little bit behind. So I'm going to give you a really short coffee break. Can we get back in here in like 6 minutes? Is that possible? What do you think?
No way.
Okay, so we're going to try to get back in here as soon as
Drink your coffee
possible.
at the
By like 11 o'clock at the absolute latest, maybe back in. Thanks, a great round of applause for our panel today.